Welcome to the archive for Sexology. Among many other things, we also offer a free critical dictionary of sexology. I am its author, Erwin Haberli. Right now, I like to speak about some terms that are very widely used, but which are misleading and therefore inappropriate for any serious scientific discussion. Let's start with the term opposite sex. This is an expression one hears all the time, but from a scientific point of view it is incorrect. Females and males are different, but that does not mean that they are opposites. They are not. In science, it is a fundamental mistake to construe differences as opposites, and it is especially wrong in the case of sexual differences. Indeed, the physical difference between the sexes is not as great as it may appear at first glance. Even the female and male sex organs are structurally very similar. Indeed, in the first weeks of their development, they are practically indistinguishable. Here is an illustration. We see here that penis and vagina develop from the same embryonic cell mass, and that their differentiation is a gradual process. It is only their growth before birth and later during puberty which makes them so different and at the same time complementary to each other. However, even then, one can still find corresponding, that is, homologous structures which indicate their common origin. This table provides a summary. Some homologous structures in the female and male sexual systems. As you can see here, there are corresponding structures in the female and male sex organs. And as you read down the comparison, you find them listed individually. To repeat, female and male bodies are not opposed to each other, but complement each other for the purpose of procreation. Here is still another table showing us that femaleness and maleness are matters of degree. Here I describe sex as a basic aspect of human sexuality, and I emphasize sexual differences are differences of degree. Sex is defined as a person's femaleness or maleness. It is determined on the basis of 5 physical criteria: chromosomal sex, gonadal sex, hormonal sex, internal accessory reproductive structures, and external sex organs. People are female or male to the degree in which they meet the physical criteria for femaleness or maleness. Most individuals are clearly female or male by all 5 physical criteria. However, a minority falls somewhat short of this test, and their sex is therefore ambiguous: intersexuality. We see here that in real life there are people who are in between female and male. They are called intersexuals and could very well be our neighbors, although we may not recognize them as different. They lead lives like everybody else and have no reason to tell us that they are not 100% female or male. However, by their very existence, they show us sexologists that it is more appropriate to think of femaleness and maleness as points on a gliding scale. So when we talk about females and males as belonging to different categories, the scientifically correct term is also the most obvious. We should simply call them the other sex. In actual fact, all sexual differences are matters of degree. That also goes for the gender roles and sexual orientation. People can be more or less female or male, more or less feminine or masculine, more or less heterosexual or homosexual. None of these is an either-or proposition, and none indicates an opposition of any kind. Okay? End of this little sermon. But since we're already talking about misleading terms, here's another one. Birth control. Actually, the word control here means as much as prevention. So what is really being said is birth prevention. Now, quite obviously, a birth can be prevented by avoiding a pregnancy, but it can also be prevented by an abortion. But is that what people always want to imply? No. In most cases, people who say birth control do not mean to include abortion, but simply mean contraception, the prevention of a conception. Well, if that is what they mean, they should say it. Contraception. Another misleading term is premarital intercourse. By that, people usually mean sexual intercourse between teenagers or at least very young adults. However, at that age, or any other age for that matter, it is very hard to predict who will eventually get married or not. Most of them will probably get married, but not all. For example, there may be an 85-year-old bachelor who has had lots of sexual intercourse throughout his long life. However, because he never got married, none of it was ever premarital. On the other hand, if he had married, let's say, at the age of 65, his sexual intercourse at age 64 would still have been premarital. Is that what the term wants to suggest? Hardly. So let's stop pretending that we can predict the future and call the behavior simply what it is: sexual intercourse between young unmarried people. And while we're on the subject of intercourse, here's another thoughtless expression: coitus interruptus. This is Latin for interrupted vaginal intercourse. Here the speakers mean that the penis is withdrawn from the vagina before ejaculation, usually to avoid a pregnancy. Apart from the fact that this is a very unreliable method of contraception, the term itself is really stupid. After all, there is no interruption. That is to say, the intercourse does not continue afterwards. Once the man has withdrawn his penis and ejaculated outside the vagina, the intercourse is not resumed. That means that it has not been interrupted. It has come to an end. It's finished, concluded, terminated, done, it's over, period. So if you feel obliged to use a Latin term, the correct one would be coitus abruptus. You can find out more about appropriate and inappropriate sexological terms in our online dictionary. Just look it up. It's free.